And good evening. I'd like to welcome you to yet another edition of the Columbus Report. I'm very fortunate to have with me with the 29th District, Mr. Louis Blessing III.
How you doing, Jason? Thank you.
Glad you could join us this evening. We have not been at the round table for a long period of time. We had a few other guests coming in, including the man in the big red suit, not including myself right now. But we are joined again in February to discuss all things up in the Capitol.
Yep.
How have things been since the last time we spoke, which was back in, believe it or not, November?
Yes, that's correct. Things have been kind of smooth sailing. We have our governor running around, running for president.
Yes,
so,
he is.
In many ways, we've been on autopilot, although we have been doing a lot of work in the committees in the House and the Senate, so things are moving forward.
I was going to say, it's not just been smooth sailing while he takes his whirlwind tour or anything like that. So one of the things we're going to start off, and one that you had brought up in the roadmap, is SB 63, which is the online voter registration.
You got it. Okay. So Senate Bill 63 is the Online Voter Registration Act. It was introduced by Senator LaRose in the Senate. I don't know if it passed unanimously. I think it was pretty close. This is an initiative by Secretary of State Husted. It is generally known that this is going to save quite a bit of money. The paper processing, all of that, adds quite a bit to the expense of this. This is just another option for people that have their valid driver's license or state ID to register online. I would point out that this does not change in any way the old paper format. That option is still there for those that don't have their state ID or driver's license. Is just a new initiative coming forward. So really the process would be is you would log on to the Secretary of State's website. If you have, you put in your name, date of birth, address, last four your social, your driver's license number, and some things in there that you have to agree to allow the Secretary of State to contact the BMV to get your signature.
Okay.
So that they can see that everything is good there, and you'd be registered. Boards of elections like this, again, it's a money saver.
I was just going to ask, have you been met with any opposition, especially from something like the Board of Elections, that you would think that they may have a little bit of worry?
Yes, they're in committee. We had one opponent, Chris Long, with the, I'm trying to remember the name of the group. It's the Citizens for Community Values or something to that effect, but a generally right-leaning group. And they actually were okay with the bill. The only thing that they wanted to see was that this would not take effect until after the 2016 election, because, as you know, it's a presidential election.
Sure.
There's a lot at stake, and they just said, hey, let's try this out on a few, smaller local elections, maybe a gubernatorial. See how it works out. If it's terrible, we can scrap it, but at least there was, the damage was minimized.
Right.
On the other side of the aisle, the League of Women Voters, some of the left-leaning groups, again, support this. Their gripe was they did not want to have the provision for the state ID or the driver's license with the online registration. Problem with that was that how do you verify who's on there is doing, is this so-and-so actually the person there doing it?
Correct. How do you eliminate things like bots and things like that?
Correct. And so clearly they're not going to get their way on that one. You need some form of security. And again, if somebody doesn't have their ID, they're more than welcome to fill out the paper format. Now, one of the other issues that came up in committee was what happens if, let's say, for example, this goes into action and it's challenged in court. And a judge says, well, you know what, I don't want that ID part of this. I'm striking that down for whatever reason. I'm not an attorney, I can't speculate. There is a unity clause in there that says that, if certain key sections of this are struck down, the whole thing is null and void. So there's quite a few protections in here to, avoid this turning into a Pandora's box where, anybody can just get in there and put in a fake registration. There were some other points in there that were actually pretty interesting in that it actually has some teeth to it here, that if somebody is to fill it in and the Secretary of State runs background, finds out that they're non-citizen, they get the boot, and if they don't the Secretary of State will end up sending out forms saying, hey, something's wrong here, you need to respond to us, and they don't do it, they can eventually be referred to the Attorney General for prosecution. So again, there's teeth to that. There's annual and monthly audits by the Secretary of State going back and forth with the boards of election to purge people from the roles that are clearly not citizens. Or let's say, for example, somebody applies for a driver's license. They happen to be on the voter rolls, but when they get their driver's license, they say that they're a non-citizen. That is an immediate red flag that is immediately transmitted to the Secretary of State to take care of that. So a lot of protections in this bill.
This was obviously not something thrown together.
Oh,
this was
absolutely.
definitely taken a look at.
Absolutely not. Right. There was, I'm trying to remember the group is the Pew Trust, I believe, in Washington, D.C. that is pushing this and is pushing it, generally speaking, nationwide. And again, the states that have had this have actually seen an increase in voter registration. However, both parties have had concerns, hey, is this going to affect one party more than the other? Is somebody going to gain a political advantage? I know from the Democrats' side, it's like, well, hey, wait a minute, what if minorities who are traditionally Democrat, don't have access to an internet connection? They're kind of they have to go through the lengthier process. Right. Republicans are worried that there would be some sort of large-scale voter fraud going on. But what they have found is, for example, in California, you have had a lot more Democrats being registered. But here's the catch: California is a much more Democrat state.
Fair.
They have very much reflected the actual percentage of Democrats versus Republicans in every single state that this has gone on in. California had 3-to-1 more Democrats registered than Republicans. Utah, on the other hand, was 4-to-1 in favor of Republicans. Right. But it's just the makeup of the states. And there have been no known issues of fraud with this, although it was brought up that, what if the system, could be hacked? And then that's always a concern. I mean,
those are legitimate fears going in, and I hate to use the word fear, but it is something to look into.
Right.
It's something that happens, unfortunately, on a daily basis.
Correct. And you've seen Target was hacked. Some of these other big name companies have been hacked. It's always a risk, but at the same time, you do what you can. You don't really want to impede progress because of woulda, coulda, shouldas here. I mean, it can happen to any group, really. And really, in the state of Ohio, we actually have, you can change your address electronically, and we haven't had any problems with that here in Ohio. So looking forward to hopefully getting this through. Mm-hmm. Again, there are some things that, may be tweaked here and there. The biggest one, of course, is the actual date of when this takes effect.
Sure.
A more minor issue is now that when you register, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how the party affiliation works. So if you vote in a primary, Republican primary, for example, you become Republican, and that lasts, I believe, for about 4 years.
Okay.
Through another cycle if you decide to just take issues. But what happens if you move, to another county? You kind of have to start over. Here with this, you can actually declare your party affiliation with the registration as well. You just click a box, fill in the party, and you can become Democrat, Republican, whatever you want, which makes sense. I mean, a lot of people would want to be able to say that up front.
I would say rather than waiting for, your primary to do so.
Correct. The only issue with this is that we've seen is it seems like it's not just relegated to the registration. You can update your, when you update your address, for example, or update, these other things, you can continue to change your party affiliation. Now, you really kind of want to avoid people going back and forth to game the system. I mean, as you, I don't know if you follow Rush Limbaugh. I don't, but I know that, there was the Operation Chaos that they talked about voting for, I think it was Barack Obama in 2008, and then, I think in years past, the other side of the aisle had done that as well to try to, game the system by joining the other, or doing the other primary. And this would kind of exacerbate that problem, so something may have to be done with that. But again, this is not
set in stone yet. We are still in those grand workings, especially since we do not have a passing date yet, let alone a start date for this as well.
Correct. And Secretary of State Husted, I mean, the party affiliation part of it was a Senate amendment. As the Secretary of State has said, do what you want with those sorts of things. I just want the online registration part of it to go forward. That's just his major push.
And going back a little bit, obviously with doing things online, we see things, the ever popular instant gratification.
Yeah.
How long is the process now being taken from that paper point of view to this? Is it going to be an instantaneous thing? Or obviously they're going to have to do, you were saying they were going to do some checks. So to what degree of speed are we going to see the process go?
That's a good question. I would say that remains to be seen with the implementation of this. I would guess that it's not going to be, you click a button and congratulations, you're registered.
Yeah, correct.
I would suspect that you'll get a notification by email or mail or something like that, hey, everything checked out. But that's okay. It's still, you can do this from the comfort of your home and not worry about it. And I can tell you, I have several friends who have moved that have not bothered to update their registration or fix this, that, or whatever. And they're like, how do you know that? And it's like, I have pointed it out, and I looked because, I want you guys out there voting.
You have to, yeah. It is a right that you're given, and you should, exercise that right.
Correct.
And I think, being in an online system like that is, as you're saying, you can do it whenever at the convenience. It's like many of us who happen to wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I forgot to do this. This could be one of those things.
Absolutely.
Oh, I haven't registered to vote. Obviously, one of the other things, timetable as to register to vote so that you could be ready for a primary or a general election. It's slipping my mind as to the number of days you have to register. Will that change?
No.
Okay, so
Absolutely
everything will
not.
stay the same with.
In fact, the deadline for registration before a general election, once you've passed that point, this website, it's actually in the statute that says, it's going to be down with a message saying you can't register until after this date. And at the same time, the audits will stop, after a certain date, so that people aren't getting kicked off, 2 weeks before the election, and there's nothing they can do about it.
And again, that's another safety precaution as well, knowing that that's not going to, add fuel to that fire.
Sure.
I think that's a great way to kind of look at that. Again, something new and progressing forward in the state. Obviously, you've made a few mentions, obviously California, Utah being few that have started this process. We're not the first to do this.
Correct.
However, how many other states do you know in the U.S. have already done so?
I don't really know the answer to that. It's a shame I can't have David Becker here next to me, because he would have been able to explain, oh yeah, this. I mean, that guy was a wealth of knowledge. But it's quite a few at this point.
Okay.
And the push is, again, to get the entire country with this system in place. So again, I think Ohio's taken the right approach. I'm glad that we did not jump in too early with this. As you know, Ohio is a purple state, a swing state. It would behoove all of us here, politicians, to avoid jumping into things, because it could cost you dearly at the ballot box. So.
And of course, with something like this going, what do you see as the next step in voting in this online era that we have? I think we've discussed a little bit of it the last time we were together, of that possibility, that realm just kind of being open.
Right. There are no plans, I can say, to do online voting. It hasn't even brought up. There's quite a few issues with that right now. Again, verifying, how do you know that this person actually voted?
Talk about a Pandora's box. There's a lot of safety measures that would have to go through in order to make sure that this is a working process.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people that on both sides, some people can't get to this, get to a terminal or get to a polling place. Well, we've had this
Absolutely.
issues for many times. So
Oh, absolutely. Not to mention with all of the paperwork that you have. I mean, I have found just personally circulating my petitions how difficult it is. If people, for example, have had hand injuries or whatever, and can have trouble writing their signatures and get bumped. I mean, it's going to be one of those things. I think one day, maybe many years in the future, it will happen when we, if we can tighten things down the right way. And certainly it would be nice. I mean, a lot of senior citizens out there that, granted they have the absentee ballots that they can go through, but they still have to physically fill them out. Doing all this online would be pretty crystal clear as to what their intent was. Got to have everything locked down before we do anything.
But I'm wondering and I think you make you kind of going into a point that there is a process, that idea of actually having that ballot and having that forward. It may be something we may never lose, but again, it's that feeling of a right and a privilege to be able to hold it. And yeah, sure, we've been doing touch screens at polling places. Some places still have a traditional paper ballot.
You got it.
Things have evolved and changed, but all in all, the right still exists.
Yes.
Hopefully that will never change.
I certainly hope so as well.
Well, looking again, I think that's a great move forward for the state, and again, hopefully we'll see some things after the election. I think we'll see more foothold on this and moving forward.
That's correct. Yep.
Well, as always, going forward in our roadmap here of what's going on in the state here on the Columbus Report, capital appropriations. You always bring us forward of what's going on.
So I had to list some of these like more major projects that we're doing.
Sure.
So the capital appropriations budget is a bill that's introduced in even numbered years to deal with basically agency infrastructure, buildings, real property, things like that, improvements thereof, equipment, but they have to have a nexus to the state. For example, if you're going to repair a large building, and a good example of a project would be that building must be on, state property, for example.
Okay.
And also due to constitutional limits, it has to be bondable, because we can only go, I believe, $750,000 in debt at the state level. That's our maximum. But if we bond things, we can actually spend more,
a little bit more.
That way we can do other things to pay off that obligation. So, yep, that's this time of year. Generally speaking, the process will start much earlier. Cincinnati Chamber, the CBC, some of these other groups will get together. They will send out applications. Local political subdivisions, some other things, other groups, people will fill them out and saying, hey, this is where we need some money to help the aging infrastructure. These groups will look them over, say, okay, this meets all the constitutional muster, and then we look them over then as a delegation, both Republicans and Democrats, specifically Hamilton County, and come upon an actual list of projects. In this case, 2014, it was 20 million or so that we had for community projects. And then this year, I think it's slightly above that. But some of these projects are obviously, really huge.
With the budget at that size,
absolutely.
Yes.
Well, a lot of it gets, swallowed up to, very large projects. For instance, the big one this year is the $12 million out of that, which is quite a huge chunk, going down to the banks. And that's for the parking garage, residential units, retail space construction at the banks. And I don't know if the viewers have been down to the banks. You have as well.
I have.
I remember going down to the yard house at one point and thinking, where in God's name do you park? Oh, there's a garage there. Well, wait a minute, that's for residential. So, this is, being pushed by some big groups down there. Cincinnati Reds want it. Cincinnati Chamber wants it. So this is being, put forward. Another one is actually construction at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens for increased parking, the Gorilla World exhibit, and holding facilities.
Nice.
And again, Cincinnati Zoo is one of our major attractions. They draw down, I believe, 80% of their money. So for any of their projects, they really only need 20% public assistance. 80% of it comes from private donors and other things. So they're very efficient with their money. That's probably going to be included.
And knowing that there is a need for parking, I know the last time I was there, not this summer, the last summer, I mean, it was a couple wraps around and finally getting underneath a solar canopy, being able to stay in there. But I mean,
Correct.
The fact of the matter is you're like, it's a Tuesday. Why can I not find a place to park?
That's right. Yes, and it's something that, you know, a lot of the local business leaders, community leaders, even city council, folks like that, the mayor, are very supportive of things like this. And there is matching money from the city, of course,
Sure.
and other private entities, so it's not like we're funding everything.
And it is a
from the
world-class
state level.
attraction to the city. I cannot condemn it for any reason. I mean,
Right.
there's some wonderful things to go to. It's just, if you can't park, you really can't go in and see anything.
Correct, absolutely. So kind of a team effort there.
Sure, sure.
And then there's the UC Health. There's going to be a construction for new cancer research facilities. It's a couple million on this one, and you know, anything for really cancer research, pushing that forward. We have world-class facilities down there at University Hospital, Children's Hospital. Again, certainly want to support them. A lot of private dollars going in to match this as well, and we felt as a delegation this would be a good one to include. And finally, we have the Center for Addiction Treatment, and we're doubling the number of detox beds down there with the medical assistance these folks receive. As you know, and as viewers have probably found out over the years, that we have a very, growing heroin problem here in the tri-state area.
Near epidemic proportions, absolutely.
Correct. And, you know, these are people that, you know, you could lock them up, but it's just generally been a failed scenario. You really want to kind of treat this as a mental health thing. You know, get them in there, detox them, get them on the road to recovery. That's what we're trying to do with this, and we felt this was a very, very worthy goal.
Looking at the number of projects that have been proposed and what's going on, I'm seeing a lot of diversity with it. You're looking at entertainment, you're looking at, you know, parking is not necessarily entertainment, but if you can't park, you can't enjoy what's there, a la the zoo or the banks. You've got medical, and you've got well, both medical, I would assume. You know, with the UC and the heroin, the addiction homes. Is that something you look towards when you're looking at this, going, you know, not a conscious effort of, well, there's one entertainment here and there's one government building here. It's nothing to that effect. But do you find that it is something that you're kind of looking for that type of variety?
No, not actually. We generally speaking, you know, we feel like a lot of this is going to drive, believe it or not, economic development.
Sure.
You know, bring about some efficiencies. I mean, you know, for example, you know, the parking garage, residential units, retail space at the banks, you know, that could, you know, you start getting more and more restaurants down there. You have GE down there.
I was going to say, with the new GE wing up there and everything,
right,
you're really seeing that progress. And
right,
then, obviously, we're getting so much closer to Paul Brown Stadium that
correct,
you're now wondering, what's the next step, what's the next phase? And of course, you're going to need some place to park.
That's right. And a lot of other times, you know, you'll look at things. There's a few others that are fairly small that you look at and you think, well, why would they necessarily need the money? And there's a lot of times if it's for example, an environmental issue. There was one, the Mill Creek Conservancy had a request in there for $500,000, and the reason for that is it would draw down $4 million from the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers. So, you know, you look at that as quite a return on investment. Now, granted, that money from the feds is certainly, you know, money from everybody, but at the end of the day, the return on investment for something like that is pretty good. So that's another thing that we'll look at when looking at projects.
Again, a large number of projects that are possibly going to be moving forward. You know, obviously, these are ones that I'm glad that you focused heavily on, the ones here in the district. So, what are you looking more forward to seeing the possibilities of this moving forward, or are there other projects that you're looking forward to?
These are pretty much the main projects for the community projects.
Sure.
A vastly larger sum of money is going to go to things like prisons and universities and, you know, other public institutions, for example. But those are considered more of a statewide thing, not the community project stuff
Right.
that we're doing. But really, it's, there's a process to it. At this point, everybody else that has gone through the process, there are numerous deadlines. There's really not going to be anything new unless there's some sort of last minute, and even then, I can't imagine that there would be a good justification for doing something like that. So, yeah, I think this is pretty much where we're at.
This is where we're at, and again, I think there are a wide variety, and again, the one that you've hit on the most was for treatment centers.
Yeah.
And which is a good lead into the
segue.
next
Sure,
segue
sure,
into
sure.
171.
Yep.
And as we've mentioned in, unfortunately, in your area, Coleraine Township, they have been a very large flagship. Dan Malloy has been a wonderful spearhead leader in getting things together in a heroin epidemic task force and getting things together, and has also brought that down to the county now that that is in need. But of course, it is not just relegated to Cincinnati and the 29th District and Coleraine Township. It's statewide, it's nationwide now.
That's correct.
This is becoming an epidemic of awful proportions.
That's right.
So House Bill 171 is introduced. What is this going to help in the state of Ohio when it comes to this heroin problem?
Okay, so what 171 does is you have a threshold of 250 grams of heroin. If you have more of that on your possession, or if you're trafficking it, for example, you are considered a major drug offender and you get hit with the maximum penalty of 11 years in prison. What this bill does is it lowers that threshold to 100 grams. Okay. And at least in statute, that is determined to be 1,000 unit doses of heroin. So you'd have to have a pretty strong addiction where if you needed 1,000 unit doses at any given time. The idea here is that these folks are drug dealers. These are the people that are, passing this out, getting more people addicted, causing more problems. Those are the people that you want to lock up and throw away. This bill was actually brought to me by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, their Renew Division, which is the Regional Enforcement and Narcotics Unit. And very supportive through this whole process. They testified, they helped out. My joint sponsor, Representative Deaver, who has the other half, actually this is in his district,
This is your district, of course. Yeah, I was just going to say.
I believe he got wind of this through the prosecutor's office and numerous judges that had dealt with this, that, with the prison population as such, some of these folks would have like 200 grams or so on them, but without the mandatory sentence, I think they could get 3 years or so, they'd be out and they'd do it again. This is to basically ensure if you truly are a drug dealer, you're going away. That having been said, this isn't the end-all, be-all. I mean,
No.
there are for every article saying that this will, do great things, and there are other bills nationwide doing this, other legislatures nationwide looking at this. There's a body of evidence that is saying, hey, look, all this is going to do is swell the prison population. And again, the jury's kind of out on that. But at this point, I can't really knock it. I mean, it passed out of the House. There was some issues with that. I can't say that it passed out unanimously. I know that some minority members, actually I say minority members, minority Democrat members, that had concerns over that this would disproportionately affect minorities. Again, maybe. I don't have the numbers to back that up, but I can certainly say that this would never be targeted at one demographic or another. If you're carrying more than 100 grams of heroin at any point, we don't care. We want you off the streets.
I think the drug itself has become one that has broken boundaries and broken demographics and such. So I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, and actually that's a good point to bring up. I can't say exactly where I grew up.
Exactly.
But we had a recent meeting, and Police Chief Denny here in Coleraine which now I guess I've given away Coleraine. Had said that they were passing out these flyers that, hey, if you have problems with heroin, work with us, before anything gets too crazy. And there were 2 streets in my home neighborhood or at least where I grew up. I don't live there now. And, there were 5 families that actually called up and said, look, we need help. And this is in, a fairly nice middle-class area. This is not the ghetto at all. And you're right. It doesn't care whether, you're super rich, super poor. It affects everybody.
Exactly.
So we will see how this helps. Currently, it's in the Senate, and we've had a couple hearings on it. I don't know if we had opponent testimony at this point, but I don't recall us having major opposition in the House. I believe the public defenders, state public defenders, actually testified against this, but at the end of the day, the committee voted against it. They said, or voted for it, and said we're going forward with this, as did the House. So we'll see where we go.
Putting on my favorite cape and horns, playing devil's advocate, you did make mention, of course, of the swelling prison population that, by doing so, could kind of shift the balance here. If this is receiving a larger penalty, is there not time to start looking at other offenses that are placing people in jail that aren't necessarily the high risk
You got
areas?
It. That's actually, it's there. I can tell you that there's a push to look at that in the House. I don't know about the Senate or the administration. Interestingly enough, there was House Bill 56, which was ban the box. So if you are applying for public sector employment only, not private sector, you can't ask right off the bat, are you a felon? You pretty much have to go in there. For example, they fill out the application. You treat them like everybody else. You can run a background check later on, but the point being is that we want to get these people back to work, even if they are felons. The point being that if you've paid your time, you shouldn't really have to have that hanging over you the rest of your life. At the same time, they cost us a fortune in the sense that if you can't get a good job, or you can't find a job, period, you're going to be on Medicaid. You're likely to, go back to doing whatever it was that got you in jail in the first place. Correct. It just basically gives you no incentive to move forward. So yes, that push is there, and really, when you think, it would be nice if it were a one-to-one, where you're tossing in all these major drug dealers and releasing people that might have had a minor drug charge that aren't really a threat to anybody.
So again, something to look at. It's unfortunate that we have to bring something like this. I mean, I understand if you look at it, each generation has had their drug problem, so to speak. However, it's every generation it's getting worse and worse and worse. Not to say that one drug is better than the other. I'm not saying anything like that, but it's just getting progressively harder to end a problem. Right. And I think these are good precautions to start putting into that'll make, hopefully, things a little bit better. And like we said earlier, it is being non-discriminatory.
That's right.
As to any place that it would like to go.
That's right. And that's why we are pushing to beat down the source of all the heroin, at least in Ohio with putting away the drug offenders. I'm sure at the federal level they're trying to knock down drugs coming into this country. Because it'd be interesting to actually look back at some of that testimony online, that you can get the written form and see what people wrote. But they talk about heroin just taking over people's minds, and they do things that they would never otherwise do. So it's a very nasty drug. And you're right, we can have that conversation if the prisons just swell and swell and swell. Then there's we'll take care of it when we get to that point. Hopefully we don't.
Well, let's start going on to a much happier note. We've kind of gone to the depths here a little bit, but let's get into House Bill 299, which is a lot more uplifting. The story that you have behind it is very unfortunate, right? But what it ends up becoming is the true nature of that story. Right. 299 is actually for state autism scholarships. Correct. For those who are taking care of children with autistic needs.
That's right. So really what it does is just permits the temporary, legal, or permanent custodian of an identified autistic child, when the custodian is not the natural or adoptive parent of the child or government agency, to apply for an autism scholarship for the child. So what this means is prior to this, you pretty much had to be a biological parent to apply for this scholarship. So what happened was I have a constituent who is the foster mom for this young girl, and it turned out that she lost the autism scholarship because she wasn't the biological parent. Problem was that this girl's father was dead and her mom was AWOL. Again, getting back to that drug problem, that was the issue. Had been in and out of prison, they simply couldn't find her. And it brought up a good point. Well, wait a minute, why should this little girl suffer simply because she doesn't have biological parents there to, or not necessarily biological, those that have actually adopted, apply on her behalf? And when you think about it, someone in that position is, in my opinion, arguably more needy than somebody that has two loving parents that are actually, going out of their way to make sure that this, their child gets the right care. So we are changing this, and so that a constituent of mine and constituents around the state have the ability to apply for this autism scholarship. Now, it doesn't actually increase the amount of money available for the autism scholarship. It simply expands those that are able to apply for the scholarship. And as always, the money does follow the student. So there's really no fraud in this, in the sense that the child still has to be, identified as autistic. They have to go to a doctor. They have to go through all that. We saw this as a huge win, and really kind of an oversight in the state that just kind of slipped through the cracks when the autism scholarship was being put forth. This bill did pass unanimously out of the House. Didn't quite do so in committee, although that person's issues were resolved and they felt comfortable voting for it on the House floor.
Good.
And it is in the Senate. I believe it is going to have a hearing this week, and we hope to get it through as quickly as possible.
Now, it is again, putting on that cape and horn again, it is a scholarship for an individual for up to $27,000.
20. That sounds about right.
Yeah. About right. And that is, again, foster parent, a legal guardian, adopted parents, biological parent. Let's look at the foster side, and I will put the preface: I am not arguing for or against. I'm just putting the devil's advocate because I do like to ask the question. They come in and they're going to start adopting, solely looking at autistic children just to get the scholarship.
Yeah.
Is there provisions in there to protect not only the state but also the child?
Sure, because the money still has to follow the child.
It has to follow the child.
So it's not like the parents can pocket the money.
Okay.
That pretty much solves that issue there.
Sure.
I mean, you can't just take it and run. So, and on top of that, you have an individual case-by-case basis. I mean, if you saw a pattern of parents doing this, and again, I wouldn't know why that they would want to do that. They're free to deny them the scholarship. So if there are problems, I mean, and somebody happened to see that, wait a minute, this is somehow being abused, they could blow the whistle and contact ODE and say, hey, what's the deal here with this? But again, I don't envision that happening, because to adopt a child with autism, which is, from what we've heard in testimony on different bills on autism, require a lot of care, a lot of work. And then you've got to go through the paperwork of actually applying for the autism scholarship, all to, at the end of the day, have the money still go to the or the child's school, and you see no benefit to that. I hate to put it so grimly, but it doesn't sound like there's very much return on investment.
I understand where you're coming from.
Fraud the system there.
Sure. There are those, unfortunately, that do look for those avenues. And unfortunately, we have to find ways to safeguard, especially the children. Do you know about how many scholarships are given annually?
I'm not really sure of that number. It's a good one to know. I would think it's probably a fairly small number, maybe 100 or so, because there's not that much money in the pool. And that number, the actual number appropriated for these scholarships, actually escapes me for the moment, but it's not a huge sum.
It didn't sound that there were, I don't want to say you had many people clamoring for the said scholarship.
Sure,
However, just a basic number was kind of where I was going to see,
Yeah.
what the goal
Right.
number was. Has this ever increased or decreased, to your knowledge?
It wasn't something that we brought up or
Okay.
discussed, not to my knowledge.
Okay. But at least this is something, again, looking out for, again, the child's well-being.
Absolutely.
In an era where, again, you and I talked about this maybe 20 years ago. This was
Sure.
never
Right.
on top of the topics.
That's right. And one other thing to point out is, it's not like with this scholarship that they're always going to get the maximum amount of money. It's kind of based on need. They're not, one child may get 2,000, another might get 27. So
Right. You're not necessarily everybody's getting the full amount. It's
case-by-case basis.
Well, speaking of case-by-cases, we're going to do yet another segue. This kind of going back to a little bit what we were talking about auditing the system when it came to online voting. We're looking at auditing other things, this being state colleges and universities.
Correct.
Now, we had kind of made mention of this last year about, especially when we were talking about the means in which state education was going.
Yes.
And what we were doing. Well, House Bill 384 was going to be put into place for these accountability measures.
Correct.
Where are we on that, and what exactly how does one audit a state university?
That would actually be the auditor of state
Okay.
that does the audit. And I believe this just recently passed out of the House, if I'm not mistaken.
Very recently, yes. It was signed into law. So but it did pass out. That was back in January. That's
Yes.
when it went out. So.
And it was really, one of those things where you just see the exploding amount of student debt. You see administrators on college campuses making a killing. I mean, the number of them that make over $300,000 a year is just, mind-boggling. Not to mention, I wish I had the list, but there was actually a list of the top 20 highest-paid public officials in the state of Ohio, and it was like 3/4 of them were, public officials at state universities. So, in light of all the exploding student debt, I think it's fair that these folks be looked at, especially
Sure.
considering the auditor of state has looked at K through 12 education and has saved lots of money. This is really just going to be kind of a more benign way to look at the colleges and say, hey, look, we're not out to attack you. We're just to see, hey, can you run more efficiently? Can you save the state more money?
It's not as if you're going in and telling them this is how you're now going to appropriate things.
Correct.
Into your budget, but it is a way of, as you're saying, looking at it to find lean ways to make things work.
Correct.
Considering, many places, not just state universities, but I mean, local government was the perfect example that they had to find ways to efficiently and
Correct.
work on a lean budget.
Right.
It almost seems like, well, it's about time
Yes.
when you see exorbitant things going on with, we're not saying that it's being used incorrectly, but it needs to be funneled properly, I guess would be the better way
Right.
to say it.
Correct.
But I guess what made the state look at this and say this is something we need to tackle? Yes, it is a state university, but you're also looking at the lower colleges as well. What made the state look at something like this right away?
I think just because that it wasn't necessarily right away. I think they've been looking at this for a while, but I believe since they had audited K through 12 education, they audited local governments, things like that, and found that they did end up saving money. That this would be another piece of low-hanging fruit that they could grab and possibly save the state a lot of money.
Well,
That's really what it boils down to.
Sure.
And it doesn't help a lot of the issues at the federal level that we can't control without going into detail on those. So.
Well, according to some research here, according to 2011, and this is doing the performance audits of the K through 12, you're looking at $77 million in potential savings.
Mm-hmm.
That's just lower level. I can't imagine what number will go up
Right.
when you look at Ohio State, OU,
Yep.
Toledo, things like that.
You got it.
The areas we have. And I mean, I know I'm targeting the larger names, but I mean, you can look at a Wright State and other places. And again, you can't compare, say, a Wright State to a College of Worcester, but
No, you're right.
But But again, these are all operating under that same ideal.
That's correct. And if you've seen what has happened to those that, and again, it's tough as an 18-year-old to know exactly what you're going to do with the rest of your life, and you graduate with a degree that really you're not able to find a job with it, but you're in tons and tons of debt. I'd be quite angry,
Sure.
As that person in that example, to find out that the universities were spending profitably here and there, which you don't know, but certainly with an audit, if you can find savings and make it so that it's cheaper for students going forward, definitely a good thing.
Do you think this is something we will see possibly passed this General Assembly?
Good question. I don't know. I can't speak for the Senate with that. I would certainly hope so. We really don't have that many session days left prior to the silly season, as it's called. So really, if it doesn't happen by end of May, it's not going to happen. So.
And if that were to be the case, do you think this will be revisited next general election?
Given that the bill's sponsors, which I believe are Duffy and Schaefer, I believe so.
I believe you're right. I do not have that written down.
Both of whom are back next year. Well, of course, provided that they are
provided
elected.
they are elected.
If they are elected, I suspect that they would reintroduce that.
Okay. Well, again, things change in the state, and hopefully we won't see too much of a change. But what we will see is progress. I think that's what the main thing we needed to talk about today is that.
Yes.
That Ohio is progressing and moving forward. And even to the fact that I've actually driving up 75 North, I am noticing more wind turbines. We are wind farming around the state, so things are progressing.
Mm-hmm.
Any closing thoughts and concerns that you may have that you may want to bring up to the constituents before we meet again in next couple months?
Off the top of my head, I would just say relax. If something is really bothering you, contact our office. And we'll be able to provide you with information on things. Because, again, going back to the online voter registration, people have freaked out about it.
Sure.
They've looked at it and thought, oh my God, this is going to be this crazy system, and there's no accountability. And it's like, well, do you know what the bill does? Oh, well, I thought it did this. Well, no, not quite. It does this. So if there's a problem, reach out to us. And again, you'll show my information.
I was just going to say, we're getting ready to do that here. So
contact us, and we'll probably be able to help you out.
Yep. And as Mr. Blessing has just said, that's the easiest thing to do. We have many ways for you to get in contact with them at their level. If we could bring up their information right there, see, ask and it comes up. 77 South High Street on the 13th floor in Columbus, 43215 if you want to send them a letter, or you can give them a call at 614-466-9091, or the new email at rep29@ohiohouse.gov. I'm going to continually call it a new email because of the old emails were awful. But those are the great ways you can get a hold of Mr. Blessing. And as he said, the office is able to get in contact to you, to them, and make things copacetic.
Absolutely.
That's the way government is supposed to work.
You got it.
Excellent. Well, we have made it to the end of the evening. I want to thank you for joining us tonight as well, and we look forward to seeing you in spring, a little bit warmer weather.
You got it. Agreed. Much warmer.
Much warmer. And we'll be back there. And I want to thank you for joining us as well. If this has been an important program to you, continue watching. I'd like to do that. But if you'd like to continue watching and maybe make a difference in 2016 and join our cruise, 825-2429, or maybe you want to create your own program. We've seen a lot of people do that as well. So that would give that information. Give us a call. I'm Jason Christopher, Waycross Community Media's Government Access Coordinator, and this has been The Globe.